The story of Black people in America is a story of resilience and triumph over unimaginable adversity. It is a story that begins with tragedy, the transatlantic slave trade. Beginning in the 16th century, millions of Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. They were stripped of their names, their languages, their cultures, and their very humanity. These men, women, and children were treated as mere cargo, subjected to horrific conditions on slave ships, where many perished before ever reaching land. Those who survived the perilous journey were thrust into a life of forced labor, brutality, and degradation. The transatlantic slave trade was a brutal system of chattel slavery, where Africans were considered property, bought and sold like commodities. They were forced to work on plantations, cultivating crops like tobacco, cotton, and sugar that fueled the economies of the colonies and, later, the United States. The wealth and prosperity of the nation were built on the backs of enslaved Africans, who endured centuries of oppression and exploitation. Their labor laid the foundation for America's economic power, yet they remained invisible, their voices silenced, their stories untold. The dehumanization of Africans was essential to justifying the institution of slavery. Racist ideologies were developed and propagated, painting Black people as inferior beings deserving of their subjugation. These false narratives served to legitimize the cruelty and barbarity inflicted upon them, creating a system where Black bodies were exploited for profit while their minds and spirits were crushed under the weight of white supremacy. The legacy of this horrific period continues to cast a long shadow on American society, shaping racial dynamics and perceptions for centuries to come. The transatlantic slave trade stands as a stark reminder of the darkest chapters of human history, a testament to the depths of human cruelty and the enduring power of greed. Yet, even in the face of unimaginable suffering, the spirit of the African people remained unbroken. They resisted their enslavement in countless ways, both large and small, clinging to their humanity and their hope for a better future. Their unwavering determination would eventually pave the way for emancipation and the long, arduous journey towards equality. For over 2 centuries, enslaved Africans toiled under the brutal conditions of chattel slavery. They cleared the land, planted the seeds, and harvested the crops that brought wealth to their captors. Their forced labor built the economic foundation of the American colonies and later the United States. From the tobacco fields of Virginia to the cotton plantations of the Deep South, the blood, sweat, and tears of enslaved Africans fueled the engine of American economic growth. The skills and ingenuity of enslaved Africans were evident in every aspect of early American life. They were skilled artisans, carpenters, blacksmiths, and craftspeople, contributing to the construction of homes, buildings, and infrastructure. They were also knowledgeable in agriculture, animal husbandry, and herbal medicine, using their expertise to sustain themselves and their communities. Despite being denied formal education and opportunities, enslaved Africans displayed remarkable resilience and resourcefulness. The contributions of enslaved Africans extended beyond the economic realm. Their presence enriched American culture in profound ways, shaping its music, cuisine, language, and folklore. The rhythms of Africa found new life in the spirituals sung by enslaved people, expressing their sorrows, hopes, and faith. These spirituals would later evolve into gospel music, blues, and jazz, becoming cornerstones of American musical heritage. While their labor built the nation's wealth, enslaved Africans were denied the fruits of their toil. They were subjected to inhumane treatment, denied basic human rights, and deprived of their freedom and dignity. Their families were torn apart, their children sold away, and their lives controlled by the whims of their enslavers. Yet, even in the face of such cruelty, the spirit of resistance burned bright. From individual acts of defiance to organized rebellions, enslaved Africans fought tirelessly for their liberation, refusing to accept their subjugation. As the United States grew, so too did the movement to abolish slavery. Abolitionists, both Black and white, spoke out against the horrors of slavery, demanding its immediate and unconditional end. They published newspapers, wrote books, delivered fiery speeches, and organized clandestine networks to help enslaved people escape to freedom. The abolitionist movement gained momentum, challenging the conscience of the nation and exposing the hypocrisy of a nation founded on the principles of liberty and justice for all, while denying those very rights to an entire race of people. Among the most prominent abolitionists were former enslaved people like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, who risked their lives and freedom to fight for the liberation of their people. Frederick Douglass, a gifted orator and writer, escaped slavery and became a powerful voice for abolition, eloquently articulating the evils of slavery and the humanity of black people. Harriet Tubman, known as the Moses of her people, escaped slavery and then made numerous perilous journeys back to the South, guiding hundreds of enslaved people to freedom along the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was a network of secret routes and safe houses used by enslaved people to escape to freedom in the North. It was a testament to the courage and compassion of both those who escaped and those who aided in their flight. The Underground Railroad represented a beacon of hope for enslaved people, a testament to the unwavering belief in freedom that burned brightly even in the darkest of times. The abolitionist movement faced fierce opposition from those who profited from slavery and those who clung to racist ideologies. Abolitionists were often met with violence, intimidation, and censorship. Their meetings were disrupted, their newspapers burned, and their lives threatened. However, they refused to be silenced, understanding that the fight for freedom required unwavering courage and determination. Their unwavering commitment to justice laid the groundwork for the tumultuous events that would eventually lead to the end of slavery in the United States. Section 4. A Nation Divided, the Civil War. The issue of slavery divided the nation, ultimately leading to the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. The Southern states, economically dependent on slave labor, seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. The Civil War was a brutal conflict that pitted brother against brother, father against son. It was a war fought over the fundamental question of whether a nation founded on the principles of liberty and equality could continue to exist with the institution of slavery. Black Americans played a pivotal role in the Civil War, fighting on both sides of the conflict. While the Confederacy initially resisted enlisting black soldiers, they were eventually forced to do so as the war dragged on and their manpower dwindled. However, it was the Union Army that embraced the service of black soldiers. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863, declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were to be freed. This historic proclamation not only shifted the moral ground of the war, but also opened the door for black men to enlist in the Union Army. Over 180,000 black men served in the United States Colored Troops, demonstrating extraordinary courage and patriotism in the face of discrimination and prejudice. They fought bravely in numerous battles, helping to turn the tide of the war in favor of the Union. Their sacrifices and contributions were instrumental in preserving the Union and abolishing slavery. The Civil War was a watershed moment in American history, marking the end of slavery and the beginning of a new era for Black Americans. The victory of the Union and the passage of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolished slavery, represented a major triumph for the cause of freedom and equality. However, the struggle for full citizenship and equal rights for Black Americans was far from over. The end of the Civil War ushered in a new set of challenges and a long and arduous journey towards true equality. Section 5. Broken Promises, Reconstruction, and its Aftermath. Following the Civil War, the nation embarked on a period known as Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. During this time, efforts were made to rebuild the war-torn South and integrate formerly enslaved people into society. The Reconstruction era saw the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, granting citizenship and voting rights to black men. These amendments, along with the establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau, represented a significant step towards equality for Black Americans. However, Reconstruction was a time of great turmoil and violence. White Southerners, resistant to change and determined to maintain their dominance, formed terrorist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, which terrorized black communities and undermined their newfound freedoms. These groups used violence, intimidation, and economic coercion to suppress black political participation and enforce racial segregation. Despite the promises of Reconstruction, the hopes for a just and equitable society were dashed. By the late 1870s, federal support for Reconstruction waned, and Southern states implemented Jim Crow laws, effectively stripping black citizens of their newly acquired rights. These laws mandated racial segregation in all aspects of public life, from schools and parks to transportation and housing. The era of Jim Crow marked a return to a system of racial apartheid, relegating black Americans to second-class citizenship. The failure of Reconstruction had devastating consequences for black Americans, who faced another century of systemic racism, discrimination, and violence. The legacy of broken promises and unfulfilled dreams cast a long shadow on race relations in the United States, fueling the struggle for civil rights that would continue throughout the 20th century. Despite the setbacks and disappointments, black Americans never abandoned their fight for equality, drawing strength from their history, their resilience, and their unwavering belief in the promise of America.